To the Shared Value Initiative 2020 Speaker Series, Resilience Reimagined. I'm Bobby Silton, the Managing Director of the Shared Value Initiative, and I'll be your host today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Shared Value Initiative, we are a global platform for leaders seeking to use business solutions to address societal challenges. We're part of FSG, a not-for-profit social impact consulting firm that was co-founded by Michael Porter of Harvard Business School and Mark Kramer. We're glad that all of you are joining us today for this session. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. This session is being recorded and we are webcasting virtually from our home, so we apologize in advance for any technical difficulties. Everyone in the audience has been placed on mute and your camera has been disabled. We're going to have a Q&A session toward the end, so please submit your questions through using the Q&A function. And if you are on social media today, please use these hashtags and handles so we could follow the conversation. So today is the third event in a series where we're featuring purpose-driven leaders and we're asking them to share with you their latest thinking. And over the course of this series, we'll explore what Resilience Reimagined means in a variety of settings and industries as a way to help rebuild systems that are more adaptable, sustainable, and equitable. Before we get to the main event, I just wanted to mention a couple of upcoming events that we have. This is a bit of an unusual week for us in that we have another session tomorrow at this same time. And this one is featuring a report that was just published yesterday on hybrid metrics. And it's about connecting shared value with shareholder value. And we'll have the lead author, Mark Kramer, in discussion with Leanna Orr of Institutional Investor. And then on October 1st, we will have Discovery's CEO, Adrian Gore, who will be in conversation with Dr. Lauren Smith of FSG. And they're going to be talking about disruptive leadership and responsive innovation. You can find details for both of these events on our website, as well as information about all the Resilience Reimagined sessions. So that's at sharedvalue.org. So today we're here to talk about partnering for supply chain transformation with leaders from Conservation International and Walmart. As company priorities and choices regarding supply chain, the choices that companies make can have a significant impact on the environment, people, and the sustainability and resilience of that supply pipeline. This is more critical than ever with the impact of climate change and the growing need to manage a fragile ecosystem. Back in 2004, Conservation International posed a question to Walmart. What would happen if the world's largest retailer made sustainability a business imperative? We're fortunate today to have Kathleen McLaughlin and M. Sanjin to talk to us about their partnership and the work that they're doing together to help improve supply chain sustainability and what it takes to deliver real progress. So just a little bit about our speakers and then we'll get to the questions. So Kathleen McLaughlin is the Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for Walmart. She is also the president of the Walmart Foundation. Last year, Walmart awarded more than $1.4 billion in cash and in-kind contributions. Prior to joining Walmart in 2013, Kathleen spent over 20 years at McKinsey. M. Sanjin is the CEO of Conservation International. He is a global conservation scientist whose work spans from genetics to wildlife migration to nature's impact on human well-being. Sanjin is widely covered in the media, and he has also hosted more than a dozen documentaries on channels such as PBS, the BBC, and Nat Geo. So Kathleen and Sanjin, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Bobby, for having us. It's great to be here.
Great to have you.
Thank you. I don't think you can see me, but I think you have to stop my video. Do I have to do it on my end?
Alicia?
I just asked you to start the video, so there should something should pop up to say start video.
Okay. Hang on a second.
And to our audience, thank you for the forgiveness here. This is what happens when we're our own IT support.
Yes, and I should give fair warning now. You may hear children or dogs appear at some point on my
There we
head.
go.
Thank you. I'm not at home. I'm actually in our office under sort of massive social distancing rules, which means that I can't get to the computer unless I signal someone through the window to come in, and then I got to get my mask on. You know the routine. So thank you for having us.
Well, that was a great icebreaker. All right, well, let's dive into the questions for our audience. And Sanjan, I'm going to ask you to start. So tell the audience how you and Kathleen know each other and a little bit about the work you're doing together.
So the relationship between Walmart and Conservation International predates both of us by many, many years. It started back in 2004 when Lee Scott was the CEO of Walmart. He made a very famous speech in, I think, 2005 that really put sustainability kind of, on the agenda right from the top. Obviously, Peter Seligman, our CEO and founder at the time, had a relationship with Lee, but also built a relationship with Rob Walton, who was part of Walmart at that time, as well as a board member chairman, I believe. So that's how it got started. But Kathleen and I both started in our organizations roughly about the same time. I joined CI 6 or 7 years ago, as did she. Joined Walmart. And what we realized is we had done a lot of work in the past, but I think that we found the ability to kind of imagine and talk not just narrowly about the work that we can do, how it is what I'm doing helping you, vice versa, but more broadly about what we want to see, what transformations we want to see on the planet at large, and how our individual organizations could combine their forces to make some of those changes come alive. So that's how I've got to know her. She's an unbelievably amazing person, a deep thinker, a wonderful advisor and friend. And so that's how it all kind of got going.
Thanks so much, Sanjan. So Kathleen, based on this long-standing relationship, combined with these ambitious sustainability goals that Walmart has, what is unique about some of the capabilities and capacity that Conservation International is bringing to this partnership?
Yeah, well, as Sanjan says, it did begin back in 2004, and it's a good example of the impact that individuals can have on the direction of entire organizations. So it really was a friendship between Peter Seligman and Rob Walton, and Rob actually joined the board of Conservation International at some point as well. And that kind of personal connection and attention on the environment and just the experiences that Rob had that he brought back to Walmart, the company, was a really important part of the awakening, I would call it, of Walmart, in that period, the kind of 2004, 2005 period, where Walmart had grown so quickly. You have to remember, it started out as a little tiny company in the middle of Arkansas. That was really, the brainchild of Sam Walton to bring products to people largely in rural locations. And his whole concept was, you shouldn't have to drive to Kansas City just to get them up, so let's actually create some stores closer to where people live and give them access to affordable products. Let's not play kind of high-low games on the pricing. Let's have everyday affordable pricing. That was a huge innovation. And then the company grew so quickly. And by, the early 2000s, it was a huge multi-billion-dollar company, and maybe the rest of the company hadn't grown up in terms of sophistication to match that size or scale. And that period of 2004, 2005, there was a lot of critique of Walmart, and probably rightly so, about, listen, you're a big company now. We've got bigger expectations for what you're doing, not only in terms of serving your customer and serving your own associates and employees, which is what most young companies do, but saying, hey, you actually have a bigger responsibility. You need to consider the impact you're having on systems all around you, and how does that play into what you do for a company? So Bobby, I think that was really the beginning of the realization of Walmart around what we now call shared value. It wasn't called that back then, but it was this understanding that, hey, if we're going to be successful as a company, we actually need to re-examine every aspect of our business and consider how can we address big societal issues through our business as a business strategy, not just CSR or philanthropy or what have you, but really, you know, through what we do. So yeah, Peter and Rob got to know each other, and Rob brought him into the Walmart executive team at the time. And as Sanjan mentioned, the CEO was a guy named Lee Scott. And Lee started to engage with stakeholders who had a lot to say to Walmart around the environment, around social issues, you know, everything from treatment of our own associates to sustainable supply chains. And so in those early days, you know, Lee did kind of come out in the fall of 2005. It was in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, which, you know, if people remember, that was a devastating incident where thousands of people died. And Walmart unexpectedly found itself in the middle of that hurricane as sort of a first responder, as well as a victim of the hurricane, given the millions of customers and thousands of associates that were in harm's way. That experience of responding to a hurricane, using assets of the company, using our food, our water, our buildings for shelter, engaging with Red Cross and local officials, and literally being on the scene to help in the immediate aftermath and the recovery, was the first big experience that Walmart had of recognizing we have assets that we can bring to bear to help society beyond just providing the food and other things that we sell through our stores. And it was at that time that Peter from CI and Rob and Lee and the leadership team had been engaging in conversations about the environment more broadly. So by October of that year, Lee and the leadership team set out some pretty sweeping ambitions for what Walmart as a large retailer could do for environmental issues. So commitments to 100% renewable energy, to zero waste, to sustainable products. And that sounds pretty basic now, but back in 2005, that was kind of a new thing, to do this through business, not as a side project. And that's really, you know, what began that. And since then, the company's been working hard at those things. What I would say in terms of the evolution, and this has tracked the evolution of our relationship with CI, is that in those early days, Walmart focused mostly on things we could do in our own operations. So doubling the fleet efficiency of our long haul truck fleet, working on energy efficiency across all of our real estate, working on renewable energy, on-site installations, power purchase agreements, you know, eliminating waste from our stores, packaging waste and food waste, all of those kinds of things that are, you know, or we would call scope 1 and 2 today, in today's kind of terminology. And when it came to products, packaging, and so on, I'd say they were isolated and good, you know, attempts to make individual products more sustainable or reduce packaging and so on. What has really shifted in the last 6-7 years, and it's been in partnership with Conservation International and others, has been to take a much more systemic approach to sustainability. And that's really where CI has helped us. So mapping back our supply chains to source, understanding what are the social and environmental issues all along those chains, and then what role can we as a retailer play, given our unique relationships with suppliers, our presence in so many different countries, both with retail operations as well as sourcing, our know-how. What can we bring to bear to help accelerate transformation of the supply chain systems? So it's more, you know, if you want to think about shared value, it's more than just, okay, certain products and services we could sell, or adjustments to our own operating model, you know, our own stores and associates and so on. It goes even beyond to work with others in the supply chain systems that we don't control at all, but we can have influence. So CI has helped us understand this. And, you know, we've worked in a couple of different ways, sometimes directly in our business, and then sometimes through Walmart.org. We've provided about $5 million worth of grants to Conservation International just in the last several years to help build out know-how for the industry at large. And so there's been work in specific commodities like shrimp or coffee, in shrimp to improve social standards in supply chain auditing schemes and standards and so on. In coffee to understand what are the challenges facing that commodity and how do practices need to change to keep coffee sustainable and ensure surety of supply, not just at Walmart, but for the world. And then most recently in the last few years, we've really been leaning in to understanding what does it take to achieve sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability, social justice, and economic viability of commodity production at landscape level. And so I can talk a bit more about that in a few minutes, but really building out that know-how, supporting CI to do that, and then bringing it to our suppliers and really trying to accelerate progress through practical action in these chains has been a huge focal point.
Thank you, Kathleen. I want to come back and ask you a question just about resilience and recovery, just based on some of the work you've done. But for the audience, there's a terrific Harvard Business School case study that is written about Walmart and kind of provides some more detail around the narrative that Kathleen just walked us through. It is really quite an amazing story about the impact of Hurricane Katrina, how it impacted the organization as a whole, and has really moved Walmart to this more systemic view of sustainability. So thank you for that. But Sandra,
yeah, and that's the, just to jump in, but there's a lot of cases about Walmart. The one you're referring to, I think, is the Michael Porter case.
yes,
Is that right?
yes,
Yeah.
the Michael Porter, Mark Kramer case study.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite a comprehensive overview for folks wanting to get more familiar with your work as well as your website. Sanjan, just wanted to see if you wanted to add anything just to, either how you've partnered with Kathleen and Walmart with creating this more systemic approach, or just things that you think that Walmart has given CI in the partnership.
Yeah, so, this wasn't, I would imagine it wasn't easy at CI either, right, at the beginning, because I wasn't at Conservation International at the time. But from outside, being an environmentalist, a conservation biologist, that was my background, that was my training. I was certainly in the space. For an organization that is a nonprofit focused on protecting nature for human well-being, but nevertheless protecting nature, to partner up with, to work with, in close coordination with a company, a big company like Walmart with a huge brand, was controversial at the time. The other organizations, we grew up in an era where we thought that the only way in which we had a role to play in the private sector was to make demands, to protest, to expose, to shine a spotlight on, to embarrass, to do everything you can to move them to a different position. That really is how, most folks got into conservation and the environmental movement, certainly in kind of my cohort. That has dramatically changed. There is still a role for that. Believe me, there's absolute role for that. And you do need to speak truth to power. You do need to be able to expose things and shine the spotlight on practices that aren't beneficial to the planet in the short term, or more important, in the long term. But the relationship has fundamentally changed over this time. So the fact that Peter and Lee and Rob and others had the courage to begin this conversation has now become something that many other organizations also participate in, conservation organizations as well as companies. And it is not too far to say that the idea of the future is a shared vision, and that both parties or multiple parties don't see an adversarial relationship, although we certainly want to be able to hold everyone accountable for commitments that we each make, but we are both trying to figure out how to get there. And so you really do have a thought partner in it. And I think at this point, I think for most companies, good companies, big brands that have embraced sustainability, it isn't anymore, only in the sustainability department. It is in their associates, in their team members, at their board level, and it's very, very often at the CEO level. So when the current CEO, Doug McMillan, talks about this, he talks about it in very personal terms. You know, he brings his own family into that equation. And that's where you sort of understand and you start realizing that this is way bigger than even this one company, as big as it is, and what they're trying to do. I think the other thing that has changed is that the capacity of these of companies like Walmart, in terms of their own team. I mean, you know, 10, 15 years ago, we were the experts. And they were there talking to us because they didn't have that expertise in-house. Now, most good companies of scale have tremendous teams that they have brought on. I mean, you know, Kathleen leads a team such as that, right? So the capacity of these teams within the companies are as good as anything you're going to find in the nonprofit sector, and oftentimes better. So our role has also changed in terms of using them as thought leadership to move something forward. And then the final point I would make is that there has been this really interesting, and Kathleen talked about this a little bit, you know, we in the conservation sector will focus mostly on individual commodities, things that we know have a detrimental impact on biodiversity or on human well-being. Coffee production, for example, or beef, or tuna, or shrimp, you name it. And we thought that the best way to move the agenda forward is to figure out how to get that one commodity into this place of sustainability. So we can go and say, yep, this cup of coffee is sustainable, end of story. We could show a clear pathway why a company would want to do that, because it would obviously influence their customers, it would influence their own supply chain. What we have come to realize is that no matter how well you do that, at the end of the day, if Indonesia is on fire, the forests are burning, it doesn't really matter whether this one commodity or this one company is doing the right thing. That at the end of the day, people don't live in commodities, they live in landscapes, they live in real places. So we had to move not just by thinking about commodity by commodity or even company by company, but actually about the landscape, a real place that people live in and make a living in, and ask this question: how do we work with Walmart and others in order to bring sustainability at the scale of the landscape, right? And that's been kind of a really interesting evolution. It's not like a brilliant idea we had or Walmart had. It's something we both came to the conclusion of: yes, it is important that we make sure that these commodities that we're invested in ultimately are as sustainable as they can be. But equally important are the places these commodities come from, the people involved in it, the entire supply chain. And if you really want to think about it that way, you just have to think about conservation at the landscape level. So one of the most exciting things that we're embarking on is really looking at some of the most important commodities at Walmart, and then asking, what is the impact on land and on water of these specific commodities, and how can investments in these specific places not just help biodiversity, not just help nature, not just help people living on the ground in those places, but ultimately also can ensure that these commodities that are common used, predominantly used, are also sustainable.
And Sanjay, would you include that in the work you're doing, the ecosystem work? I know ecosystem has a more specific definition from a scientific standpoint, but are you talking about these market ecosystems as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we approach it, yes, but the way we tend to approach it is asking whether we can create a coalition for sustainability within a landscape of scale. So you take a place like North Sumatra in Indonesia. This is a place that is dripping with biodiversity. You know, from tigers to orangutans, you're going to find them in this landscape. It is a absolute global treasure, a biodiversity hotspot. It also has many, many communities who are tied to nature and who make their living from those landscapes. And it's hugely important for commodities like palm oil, like rubber, like cocoa, like rice, etc. Right? You can name them. So the challenge here is that how do we make sure that the communities that are living there are benefiting from living in proximity to nature, but also can produce things in a sustainable way at scale across this entire landscape, so that when Walmart is sourcing something or other companies are sourcing something from that landscape, they know that they're not just looking narrowly at their commodity, but they know that the entire place, for lack of a better word, is safe or being taken care of. It's much harder to do, and there's no easy answer to it, but it really does make you realize that it's no longer good enough to say, well, we don't do it, so therefore we are a good company. Now, at the scale at which most of these companies and the scale at which CI works, and the fact that we live in an interconnected world, we truly are in this together, and we sink or swim together. And I think that's been a mental shift. And I love that. And I think that the best companies understand that and are not narrowly just looking at, of course they have to look at their bottom line. Of course they have to be profitable. Of course they have to deliver shareholder value. We get all of that. But it's no longer good enough to just look at it narrowly. You really have to think about the entire industry, the entire sector, and almost think about it in a pre-competitive way.
Yes, no, I think that makes so much sense. Kathleen, I'm going to come back to you on just talking a little bit more about, you talked about how Walmart is looking at things more systemically. Do you think that your work, this new, more strategic lens, the application of shared value, do you think that this is helping Walmart be better prepared to be more resilient, to recover from crises? We have lots of stressors now on the supply chain, whether it's COVID or climate change. Talk to us a little bit about that, about your resiliency.
Yeah, it really is a mindset about participating with others to strengthen the underlying systems that a business relies on, whether that's workforce development or supply chains, or even local community systems that support a community that ultimately is your customer and associate base. So it's a shift in mindset that, applied to any business problem, does help drive resilience. And I'll just give a couple examples of where things are shifting and how we're trying to engage around what Sanjan's talking about, which is this place-based approach, this jurisdiction approach to enhancing the resilience of commodities that end up getting used for food and other products. So one example, and actually let me back up a minute. I think the other point that Sanjan made a few minutes ago is that there is a growing recognition among business leaders, as well as nonprofit leaders, as well as government leaders, that these challenges we face, like climate change or nature loss, that are so jeopardizing the future of humanity, let alone business economics or resilience or what have you. There's this recognition among leaders across the sectors that the only way we solve these challenges is by collaborating across sectors in a really productive way to rewire the way business happens, government policy, consumer behavior. All of these things are interrelated. So it's a systemic issue. It requires whole system transformation. So that is why what Sanjan's saying is so important, that we have to shift from going, oh, look, this cup that I'm drinking from is sustainable, to landscape level, this critical place, Indonesia, that, how do we engage with that landscape in a way that allows us to continue to create livelihoods for local people and to source critical products that we need in different parts of the world day to day for eating and clothes and everything else, in a way that is environmentally sustainable and economically sustainable and just, in terms of equity. So this idea of the place-based approach becomes quite important. And so folks are collaborating across sectors to figure out, well, how would we do this? So I'm just going to give a couple examples to make it practical. So one is we launched an effort a number of years ago called Project Gigaton, which invites our suppliers to engage in practical actions in their businesses to decarbonize consumer supply chains. And there are multiple arenas, types of projects people can participate in: energy, renewable energy and energy efficiency, product design, packaging, waste reduction, and so on. But two of the arenas that we highlighted for suppliers to engage in are the two that are related to nature and come back to this notion of jurisdiction. So one is regenerative agriculture and the other is forests. So engaging in forests in a different way. Those are two of the most powerful untapped levers, not only for restoring nature and sustainability of products, but reversing climate change. And yet they're two that are hardest for our suppliers to engage in. And they're two that have the lowest, I'd say participation among our suppliers so far. And why? Because it's hard. They don't know what to do beyond just certifying their products. So at the Global Climate Action Summit in California, back in 2018, we worked with CI and a number of other NGOs to launch a new set of project types that made it easier for suppliers to understand how they could connect their own commodity sourcing to these place-based approaches. And CI developed, basically a guide for companies to use. It's now publicly available about what is a jurisdiction approach, how could you get involved as a company in supporting projects like this, what's a way to get started, how do you make it practical for your own business as a shared value initiative, as something that's going to strengthen your business. So that's just one practical example, and we're in the middle now of investigating a couple specific projects for our own sourcing in Malaysia, palm oil, and things like that. Second example I would give is around Indonesia. So Sanjan was just talking about this incredibly important landscape for climate and for biodiversity. And so we've been supporting a group called the Coalition for Sustainable Livelihoods that is a platform that helps companies and governments and NGOs connect into specific projects in the region that could involve sourcing some of these critical commodities: palm oil, cocoa, rubber, coffee, timber, with other stakeholders to create an ecosystem that is balancing conservation, restoration of degraded lands, better production and management of working lands for the benefit of the local people, so that you get environmental sustainability, more carbon sequestration, better biodiversity, and economic growth, and equity and livelihoods for local people. So
and a stable supply chain.
And a stable supply chain. So this is what we need to do as a society. We have to rewire the way that we live and work, and just what are all of our methods of getting the things that we're needing to exist day to day in a way that is truly sustainable. And it's tough problem solving. And to your point, Sanjan, we got to go beyond. It's not just, we need the activism and all that, but we need the problem solving. We got to have people focused on, okay, how do we solve this problem? Recognizing that, today, pretty much every leader recognizes this is an issue. We don't need like the wake-up call. We need to actually work on it. So, that's one of the things we really value, and we can't do it. You talked about our expertise, and yeah, we have more expertise now, Sanjan, than we did 10 years ago. But it is by no means the same kind of expertise that you.
Well, Bobby, the thing about Kathleen is every time I speak to her, I not only learn something new about Walmart, but I also learn something new about CI. And so it's a great team over there. So
that's called partnership. Well, that's a nice segue into a question I have for you, Sanjan, about leadership. So, you in your role get to work with lots of companies in addition to working with Walmart. With your work with corporate leaders to help them build a more sustainable business, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face? And are there any particular leadership strengths that you find particularly helpful in driving a more sustainable business?
Oh, what a great question. The thing that has been most surprising to me, particularly I would say over the last 4 or so years, 3-4 years, is how willing. Now remember, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm talking about brands that we're already aligned with and working with, right? So, but these brands, these good companies, I've been surprised at how quickly at the CEO level, sustainability, climate has been embraced. 10 years ago, I sort of said this when we were at the World Economic Forum in Davos, but we were sort of on the streets kind of looking in. 5 years ago, we were sort of led into the lobby. Now, sometimes we're being lectured to by the CEOs of these companies about needing to move faster. And it's this really interesting moment that I'm finding where I think there is a generation of leaders now at the helm of some of these companies who take it very personally. I'm going to pick on another CEO now, Alan Jope at Unilever. He says he walks down the beach with his kids. The kids are pointing out different things on the shore that are Unilever products that are washed up as litter. And he says, I don't want to be the CEO of branded litter. It's deeply personal now. And so that's been really interesting. I think some of the willingness of companies to shift has been faster than anything I would have anticipated. The scale at which they're willing to shift has been faster than anything I've expected. During COVID, during this lockdown, where many companies are reeling, where all of us are reeling in one way, shape, or form, I've been stunned at the fact that most companies that we're in conversation with or engaged with have not only continued that engagement, but have accelerated that engagement, whether it's P&G, whether it's Apple, whether it's Walmart. It really just hasn't slowed down, because I think they see that in the long term, if you're building a company to last, a few decades or centuries, you really have to build with sustainability, in mind. I think the hard problem sometimes we face from a conservation organization's perspective is that when we go in to talk to new companies and we're just establishing the relationship, sometimes the folks that we're talking to, because of their job, because of where they sit in the company, are narrowly thinking about how can you do something for me that right now will deliver immediate value to my customers, to my team members, or to my share price. That's a hard conversation to have, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be in a consulting relationship. I mean, there's plenty of expertise out there, and all these companies can afford to get the best of the best to help them with it. What you want to actually be able to do is to have an expansive conversation about where could we take the planet. And that only comes if you meet the enlightened leaders like Kathleen, or you meet folks in the C-suite or at the board level who are willing to have the time to sort of sit back and imagine. So the companies that we've had these big breakthroughs with, where we actually think we can change the curve, change the trajectory of the planet, those happen really at the level where the space is there, the permission is there to think expansively.
Thank you.
And that's where the most interest is. That actually, look, if a company wants to do good in any of these spaces, they can do it right now. They don't need us. They should be doing it. They should be doing it much faster than any nonprofit can shine a spotlight on them. Where the nonprofit sector can really work is to think about innovative ideas. Think about trying to do something like in this, Coalition for a Sustainable Landscape, where it's not really been done before at this scale. That's where cool stuff happens. So nonprofits can innovate and take risks. Companies can act faster and bring more capital to something than really anything else. Like, that's what they do. And governments, you actually need governments too, because you need governments to scale or to put in place policies that don't undermine the whole thing. So you need all three, but each one really needs to understand the relationship that they play in that spectrum. If we're trying to get to a livable planet within my lifetime and your lifetime, and not kick the can down the road for another generation, by which time I guarantee you it'll be too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a great points and ties back to this whole notion of collaboration, and also to be complementary in terms of what the parties bring and the roles that they play. So thank you for that. I'm going to switch.
And Bobby, one thing, and in terms of attracting talent to your companies, right? I mean, it's interesting that many of the conversations that you open the newspaper right now, and you will find employee resources groups in every major company that is pushing companies to do better in everything you can think about: social change, Black Lives Matter, environmental change, etc. So this new group of employees, this is at CI as well. My team, half my team are millennials. They are impatient for change, and I love that. That's the good thing about being young and being, impatient. And so if you're going to attract talent as a company today or as a nonprofit today, you really better be on the cutting edge. You better be able to offer something within the attention span that is now narrowed of younger people.
Well, and also, employees, I think, are a much more powerful stakeholder than they used to be in terms of these issues. And I'm going to switch us now to talk about stakeholder capitalism. With the level of inequity and racial injustice in the world, it's good that we have entered, at least into this conversation of stakeholder capitalism. We saw the Business Roundtable a year ago make a declaration about corporate purpose, and that it includes more stakeholders than shareholders. That was followed by the World Economic Forum in January with Davos 2020, making a similar declaration. So I'm asking the two of you as leaders in the field, what does stakeholder capitalism mean to you? And I know you've touched on some of it, but would love to hear how you define stakeholder capitalism.
Sure, I'm happy to start. For us, we believe the role of business is to create wealth for society. And that is through business, offering products and services that meet a need in society. And we think it goes without saying that the better that you can meet a true need, the more likely you'll be successful as a business. So that's serving the customer. In running the business in a way that is creating value for associates or employees, really attracting talent and helping people thrive that are actually working in that company. Running your business in a way that supports the suppliers, the people who supply all the materials you need to provide your products and services, because if you don't have a healthy supplier base that is actually delivering great value to your business and then onto your customers, that's not sustainable. Being a productive member of the local community to attract customers and support in the community for having the business, paying the taxes locally to have a thriving business, providing employment for people who live in the local community. And, we would argue even the planet then. So what are the ways that the business is affecting the systems that it relies on, natural systems, whether that's climate or nature, or what have you. So we take a pretty holistic view. And for us, that statement by the BRT recognizes that in the long run, a company cannot be successful from a financial perspective if it's not creating value for the stakeholders that it relies on to run the business, that these things converge. And we think the same is true for systems. We live in one physical space constrained by time as humanity. So environmental, social, and economic systems are all highly intertwined. There's no such thing as a silo that's hermetically sealed, where I'll be financially successful over here, and meanwhile, I don't know what's going on socially or environmentally. It doesn't work. So where you do get trade-offs across stakeholders, obviously, is in the short term. And that's, I think, what causes challenges for folks. So people may often make a short-term decision to drive current earnings or, see what happens with the stock price. And that's where people run into trouble. That is not shared value. That's short-termism, and it's something that we're trying to fight against, at Walmart. And we've had situations in our own history. A few years ago, we were really investing in our associate proposition. We raised wages substantially in a very short period of time, and we suffered for it in these short-term oriented, capital markets. I think we lost, I won't even be able to get the right number, but it was a substantial amount of our market cap because we had made these investments in wages and other benefits. And there were a lot of critics that said, oh, Walmart, what are you doing? You should be taking care of the shareholder and you're not creating value. And we knew it was the right thing to do. That even though our current earnings certainly suffered, that over time things would rebalance, and that the long-term interests in terms of value creation for our various stakeholders, including the shareholder, would be better served by that good business decision. And that has certainly proven to be true. So, in summary, it's about creating wealth for society. The only way to sustain that over time is to serve all the stakeholders and to create value that's optimal across the board.
And that example that you gave, Kathleen, just about, some of the criticism for the minimum wage increase, that is the kind of bar setting I think that Walmart can do, just given your size and your scale.
Right.
Sanjan, I'm going to let you answer this question, and then we are going to turn to
Sure.
audience Q&A because we are running short on time. The time is going by quickly. For those of you in the audience who do have questions for our speakers, please submit them. But Sanjan, how about you in terms of stakeholders?
Yeah, so I completely agree with everything Kathleen said. She summarized that really well. I mean, I would just sort of emphasize that for me, stakeholder capitalism, really means that, every community that the product or the commodity or the company touches, every community stands to benefit and has the opportunity to engage. So it is not building on the backs of someone else. It's not, it's really asking, from the moment you're looking at growing something on a landscape to shipping it, to moving it through another company, to getting it into your company, to having your team behind it, to selling it to your consumers, and then making sure that the waste is taken care of, as well. That in every step of the way, that the community has the opportunity to engage and stands to benefit from it. And that's what you need to be driving at when you think about stakeholder capitalism. I think that's what the market demands. I think that's what your team members within your company demands. And the interesting thing is the companies that have been a bit more established actually sort of get this inherently, right? So if you're P&G and you've been around for 170 years, you're planning on being around for a lot longer, you kind of have to start thinking in those sorts of circular sort of ways. I think the companies that are struggling a little bit with this are the tech companies, the ones that have exploded onto the scene with a new model that is often disruptive. And guess what? They're playing catch up now. If you think about how fragile the world is, really, like if you ever thought how fragile it was the last 6 months, whether you, Bobby, in California, you can't go out right now because of the smoke, or whether me here in Arlington with my mask here, it's a connected and fragile world. In a connected and fragile world, stakeholder capitalism and companies and organizations that embrace it are ultimately going to be the winners.
Yes, and making sure that the stakeholder voices are heard. And that
yes, and the opportunity to participate, right? Sometimes it's just not even there. You're told what's going to happen to you. And if you're on that end, if you're coming from the global south, if you're in Liberia or in Brazil or in North Sumatra, imagine how that must feel. So that's part of it too.
Yes, exactly. Well, the first question we have from our audience here in my feed is, what role should government play in landscape preservation?
I'll take a quick crack at it, Kathleen, if that's okay. So, right. So the conservation movement is kind of yo-yoed, right? So we used to think government could do everything. And so let's create a national park. That was like the model. And if we did that, we thought, well, we've done. And then we stepped back and we realized it's a tiny island and everything else is going, hell in a handbasket around it. So then we thought, okay, governments just take too long. It's all about the private sector. Guess what? Private sector has lots of money. They can move fast. You just have one enlightened leader, like a Doug or a Lee or a Kathleen, and we can move it. That doesn't work either, right? Because even though a company can be massive, even a moderate-sized government can completely swamp out the positive or negative effects they're having by a little tweak in politics that is so buried within like the regional governor's like office that it'll leave your head scratching. So out of hard experience on things like the round table on palm oil, on sustainable palm oil, for example, we have learned that you absolutely need to bring both players, all three, civil society, government, and companies need to participate in it. You cannot really get one without the other, because what government has that no one really else has is they're slow, but they have scale. They have scale.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Kathleen, this is a question for you. How does Walmart share its focus on sustainability and equity with its customer base? And as a retailer, how do you reconcile that they need to, that you need to sell more in order to stay solvent, but also that people are over consuming and producing a lot of waste. This refers to the comments Sanjan made about branded litter.
Yeah. So in terms of the customer engagement, there's a few different ways. So one is through in-store communications. So things like packaging, we find that is a good place to communicate about individual sustainability attributes, whether it's a particular certification like MSC or FSC or RSPO or what have you, or other attributes about the product. We had a t-shirt, for example, where we worked with the suppliers to change the way it was produced. It was traceable cotton back to the US. The water used and the electricity in the mills was something like 30 to 40% of typical and so on. And we actually put those benefits on the tag, and that was hugely appreciated by customers, that it was an affordable t-shirt, yet it was the most sustainable t-shirt. And that's really what we're trying to do, is democratize sustainability and just say, well, you should expect that from everything. It's not, you shouldn't have to pay 8 times as much to have something that saves resources. You would think it would be the opposite. So those are certainly important channels. Another way is through internet, through our app, Walmart.com app that customers use to actually shop. So we have a shop on there where people can look for particular products that right now we're showcasing things that are really ideal from a waste or packaging perspective, in terms of recycled content, recyclability, reusability, and so on. But over time, we've emphasized different aspects of sustainability. A few years ago, we were emphasizing the sustainable actions taken by the suppliers as companies and so on. So we've changed that from time to time. So that's another way. A third way is through blogs, social media, and so on. I typically publish a blog once every few weeks or so on different topics, and I do that through LinkedIn or through Twitter or other channels. And then our website, our corporate website, we publish quite a bit there around our environmental and social and governance performance. So our strategies against each issue area, what's our kind of investment thesis for, creating better outcomes, the metrics, the progress, what we find challenging, it's all kind of there for anybody who wants to discover it. So those are some different ways of engaging the customer. In terms of consumption, yeah, absolutely. I mean, our whole goal is to make consumption circular, to actually have not only a limit the footprint or circular approach to consumer product development, but to have a regenerative approach. What would it be if the bananas that you eat or the bread that you eat or the clothing that you wear, the production of that actually was regenerative for nature and zero carbon? That's the vision we're trying to work toward. Walmart, we're a company that sells basics. We're not trying to introduce some new fashion and chase that, or kind of things that people don't need. Like it's the kind of place you go for the basics of your eating and clothing that you wear and things for your house. And we'd love to, our vision is to actually have a world where the things that people need and rely on for their families day in, day out are regenerative, socially, environmentally, and economically.
That's terrific. That we need more of that type of thinking, Kathleen. Thank you. Sanjan, this one's for you. For Conservation International, have you seen an uptick by other corporations in approaching you to partner in the ways that you partner with Walmart?
Yeah, absolutely. Walmart was a well-publicized and early example and a relationship that has endured and grown in multiple ways over the years. And it's always a great case study, but also a great calling card to other brands and other companies to sort of say, look, if they've tried to do this with Walmart, and they've maybe in our sector, we can do that as well. And so today, the companies that we really partner with, so P&G is a great example. We have a wonderful new relationship with P&G that's very productive around climate. But that relationship, part of that relationship started at a Walmart event. where I so happen to sit next to and speak with someone from P&G. And now that has blossomed into, so there's direct connections that way, but also the indirect connections as well.
Great.
But you got to be careful. So the one thing I'd say on that, for others thinking about this, you got to be transparent about what you do. You got to own up when you screw up, and you got to be thoughtful about the brands that you want to align the most important thing we have at Conservation International, outside of our people, is our brand. And once that brand doesn't stand for the values you care about, you will suffer for it. So we take this very carefully and seriously, and we don't just automatically partner with any company. It's quite a thoughtful process that we go through to determine the scope and scale of partnership.
It goes back to the notion that you talked about earlier about having shared vision, that without that these partnerships are really challenging.
Yes.
Kathleen, actually this could be for either of you. Why does shared value take so much convincing at the corporate level? And what is the first step a company can take to adopt shared value?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to make a note, Bobby, there are great questions coming into the chat. I'm reading them all. Is there a way that somebody from the Shared Value Initiative can just document those? I'd love to have them, and I will do my best to answer them through blogs or other ways. It's really helpful to get that feedback on those questions. Why does it take so much convincing? Well, I think, the legacy or the shadow of Milton Friedman is enormous, right? And kind of, I don't know, I think there was a misunderstanding in business for many years about what does value creation mean, and maybe not so much misunderstanding, but just errors in the math and in the assumptions, right? Because when you try to project shareholder value or calculate shareholder value, the way you do it, and this is for many years, I used to be at McKinsey for many, many years, and really my first month at McKinsey as a young consultant with no business background, I came out of liberal arts and engineering. I literally spent a month in a boot camp learning how to calculate net present value. And I was taught, well, you kind of project what's the revenue, what's the cost, what's the capital, many years forward, discount it back, and that's shareholder value. And any decision you face, project it forward versus, the base case, and the difference tells you whether you create value or not. Well, your perspective on whether you're going to create shareholder value entirely depends on the assumptions you make for the revenue line and the cost line and the capital line. And so people will often make false trade-offs. They'll say, oh, well, I don't want to spend more on, investing in the resilience of my coffee chain because the cost will go up. Well, what they're not thinking is, okay, if you don't, then you better assume the revenue goes down at some point because there will be no more coffee to sell, right? Or the quality will be bad or whatever. Like, they don't think through at that level. And I think that is one of the reasons that sometimes people make mistakes and they focus on the short term, not appreciating what's going to actually happen to value over time. That's point one. Point two, though, and this is a more positive one, I think there's been a massive shift in business. I find these days, I don't have to do a lot of convincing. It's a lot more obvious to business leaders, this point about our world has shrunk, and you can't separate environmental, social, governance issues from financial value creation. And people are much more attuned to this notion that, of course, we need to serve the customer and the associates and the suppliers and the communities if we have any hope of sustaining financial value in our company. People get that now in a way that they didn't, 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago. So I see a sea change in appreciation for that just in business. But I also think there's the Alan Jope phenomenon you talked about, Sanjan, which is people are people. Most of us also outside of our business lives, live in a community. We might have families, we're in a neighborhood, we kind of live like everybody else lives. And so just as human beings, we appreciate what's happening in the world and how things are interconnected and the role that all of us plays, whatever job we have or part we play in society, really to do our part in the common enterprise.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there with that. Kathleen, Sanjan, this has been an incredible hour. It went by so quickly. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and wisdom with us today, and continued success on this incredible partnership. I want to also give a quick shout out to the Shared Value Initiative team, Alicia Dunn, Rima Google, Georgie Eckert, Sam Wallach, and Amani Hicks, who work behind the scenes to make this event happen today. And importantly, thank you to our audience for being with us. We hope you join us tomorrow for the hybrid metrics discussion, and we hope we see you at another event soon. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.